ever experienced the phenomenon where people who are naturally very, very good at something are often not that good at teaching it to others? So I've had that experience in university where I took a course with a brilliant researcher said to be one of a kind, right? A singular mind in our generation. And on the first day, he walked into class and he started filling the blackboard with equations. And I sat there in complete horror for a couple of minutes until I gathered the courage to raise my hand and ask him what he was doing. And he stared at me for the longest 3 seconds in history until he told me, "What? This is something that you learn in elementary school." No, I did not learn complex integration in elementary school. So people who are naturally good at things will often not be that good at explaining them. And the reason for that is that it will often be hard for them to understand what other people don't understand. And the reason I'm telling you that is because today I will talk to you about organizational politics, and I'm not naturally good at organizational politics, which means that I'm very, very good at explaining it. So who am I? My name is Hila Noga. I have 20 years of experience in tech, more than 10 of them in leadership position. Right now, I am leading the reinforcement learning and large language models team in Google Research Israel, and before that, I was the CTO and co-founder in LixND and the CTO of Hello Heart, among other things. And as part of my extracurricular activities, I mentored many women during their career on their organizational challenges, and in fact founded a program in Ba'ot, which is one of the largest women in tech communities in Israel, that focuses precisely on that. That means that throughout my career, I've gained hundreds of hours of experience discussing politics with dozens of women. But as I said, this wasn't always easy for me. So I'm a bit of a cliché, and like many people in our profession, I loved coding as a kid. And when I was asked what I'd like to be when I grow up, I always said that I would like to be a programmer. And the reason I gave was that I don't want to work with people. And I really wasn't good at it. So I want to share this picture with you from my childhood. This is very sentimental for me. This is the mountain of my political mistakes. And on good days, when I sit at the top of it, I can see the ground. And I think that this is common to a lot of people. If you're anything like me, maybe you are also feeling like you understand machines better than you understand human beings. And when I have this discussion with people, one of the things that often will come up is how uncomfortable they are discussing politics. And when I ask them why, they will often say all sorts of colorful things like, politics is about backstabbing and scheming, right? But if you spend some time thinking about it, if you want to achieve anything meaningful, anything significant in our career, it's almost impossible to do that without working effectively with other people in a group. And what is politics, if not the science and the set of tools for navigating relationships in organizations effectively? And like any other tool, you can use it in better ways or in worse ways. And what I'm pitching is that the right way to use politics is as a tool to build trust-based relationships and make the right things happen. Okay, so if we agree that politics are important and ethical politics is an appropriate and achievable goal to aim for, how do we approach that? For me, there were two things that made the biggest difference in my journey to mastering politics. The first one was realizing that if I'm not naturally good at this subject, I'll have to take responsibility and be active in my learning. And the second one was realizing that I'll have to find my own way to approach this subject. And the way I found was collecting useful mental models for navigating organizational politics. Now, what are mental models? Mental models are tools that help us understand and analyze situations or complex and abstract ideas. Now, we're all familiar with this idea. We work with mental models every day as developers. For instance, we all have a mental model of how the CPU works, or how objects are rendered on the screen, or what's the distribution, depending on your specific area of work, right? And in the same way, we can develop mental models that will help us deal with soft subjects, like interpersonal relationships. Now, what mental models can help us navigate organizational politics? The first subject I'd like to discuss, which stands at the core of our political understanding, and if you remember only one thing from this lecture, this is the concept you should remember, is political capital. Political capital is a measure of the amount of influence a person has in the organization. A person with a lot of political capital will have an easier time affecting the agendas in the organization than people with a lesser amount of political capital. And why is it called a capital? Because in many ways it behaves like money. We all start our way in the organization with an initial amount of political capital, which can vary according to our background, the relationships we have with people in the organization, and even how well we did in the interviews. Over time, we can acquire more and more political capital by doing good work and creating new meaningful relationships. Once we gain enough capital, we may choose to invest it. For instance, we may choose to use our influence and ask to take on an important and strategic project, or try and push an initiative that is important for us. And just as it sometimes happens with money, our investment may pay off and we will gain additional capital as a result. For instance, we may manage to get the important and strategic project done or convince stakeholders in the organization in the importance of our initiative. But on the other hand, if we don't succeed, we may lose the initial amount of political capital that we try to invest. But failed investment is not the only way to lose political capital. We may lose political capital by wasting it, which means behaving in ways that only reduce the amount of capital we have without having the potential gains tied to them. So, for instance, common mistakes are not delivering good work, fighting with people, or behaving unprofessionally. These are all ways that will cause you to lose your political capital in the long run. And finally, when we have enough political capital, we may choose to spend it in positive ways that also don't have potential gains tied to them. Just like with real money, I don't use all my money to invest in the stock exchange. Sometimes I choose to use it to buy musical instruments or clothing or cakes or whatever it is that I want. Similarly, with my political capital, I may choose to spend it to push agendas that are important to me in the organization. So, for instance, I'm a feminist, so I'm likely to use my capital to advance feminist agendas within the organizations that I'm a part of. So, how do you use this model in practice? One of the most common frustrations I talk about with experienced engineers who've been through a career change is that often they will feel like they're not as appreciated in their new job as they used to be in their previous one. And it's much harder for them to get stuff done. Now, if you think about it, within the context of political capital, you realize that this career change cost them a large amount of capital, and now they have a lot less to work with. Now, if you're doing a change and you're not aware of this and not expecting it, you might be surprised and discouraged by this effect. But it's important to remember that you made this change and it benefits you in different ways. And in your new place of work, you have the experience that you gained in the previous one, and now you're much better positioned to regain the capital that you've lost as a result of the transition and to increase it further. So, political capital is the basis of our ability to move things in the organization. This is the source of our influence. But what exactly are we trying to achieve? In order to understand that, let's talk about alignment, which is a tool that allows us to understand people's actions within the framework of gains and losses. So, In this diagram, the vertical division describes whether I benefit or I lose from a certain situation. And the horizontal subdivision describes whether the other or the organization benefits or loses from a certain situation. Now, clearly, situations in which both sides lose are not good, and I don't want to talk about them. In certain cases, people will behave in ways which are self-serving. This means that they have something to gain from the situation, but the other party loses. And this is the kind of behavior that we think about when we think about unethical political behavior. On the other hand, there are people who behave like martyrs, which means that the other side benefits from the situation while they lose. And I'm sure you can think of examples for people behaving like that, or maybe you behave like that yourselves, right? What we should understand is that both types of imbalance are not good for us and should be avoided. On an ethical level, in each of these situations, there's a side that wins and a side that loses. And on a practical level, they are both not sustainable in the long run. If I'm behaving in a self-serving way, eventually people will want to avoid working with me. And if I behave as a martyr, I'm likely to become disgruntled over time, and this will not be good for my emotional well-being and will prevent me from doing my best work. And last, the ideal situation in which both sides win. And this is what we should aim for. So, as an example, let's look at how alignment plays out in one of the most sensitive situations in our career, which is when we're trying to ask for a raise. A lot of times, people don't feel comfortable going to their employers and asking for a raise because they feel like the employer doesn't have an interest to raise their salary. And indeed, if we just go to our boss and ask for a raise because we feel like getting more money, we may not get the best results. But if we do our homework and discover that indeed our work is worth to our employer more than what we're currently being paid for it, it means that staying in the current role with the current salary makes us martyrs in this situation. Now, under the assumption that we are doing good work, that our employer wants to retain us, and that the employer is aware of this framework of gains and losses that we just talked about, it means that the employer has an interest to pay us our fair market wage because it increases the chance that we will be happy and productive in this role for a longer period of time. Okay? So we found an alignment between our interest and the employer interest. And this is how we should present our argument when we go to ask for a raise. Another place where alignment plays out is when we have a brilliant idea that we want to try and push in the organization. So let's say that I decided that my life is too relaxed and I need some action, so I want to take our main service and break it down into microservices, right? If I go to my manager and tell her that, there's no reason for her to agree to this change. In order to convince her, I need to find a way to align this initiative with organizational needs. So, for example, it may be that breaking the service into microservices will simplify maintenance in some way or allow us to scale the product better. So this might be a convincing argument that will allow me to push this project forward. And when I try to convince people that my idea is good, it is my job to take ownership and to find this kind of alignment. From the manager's side, I will often send my employees to do homework and get back to me with better justifications for the ideas that they bring to me. I find that if they manage to come to me with good justifications, then we all win because they made a strong case for their project and it's worth going forward with. And if they cannot come up with this justification, it will often save a lot of time of back and forth arguing whether we should go forward with this idea or not. And it allows them to take ownership over the project and over the process and over advocating for it in the organization. So, we talked about why we're doing the things we're doing, and we talked about how to get stuff done. Now let's talk about another technique that's probably going to be the most controversial in this presentation for achieving things in the organization, which is managing narratives. In the basis of the concept of a narrative, there's the understanding that reality is comprised of a bunch of facts, and around each collection of facts, we can build multiple stories that will differ from each other by the places where we choose to put our focus and the words that we choose to describe situations. And a lot of times, around the same collection of facts, we can build a lot of stories which will all be equally valid. For example, let's say that I'm working on a task, and this task takes longer than what I originally anticipated. Now, I could tell the story that I'm slow, right? That's a valid description of this situation. But I could also look a little bit deeper and maybe see that the design took longer than anticipated because the system was more complex than we thought. And maybe I could talk about needing to communicate differently about this kind of setback. Now, instead of choosing a narrative that focuses on my innate capabilities, what I'm doing now is talking about what I did well and what I could improve next time. And it's important to understand that a narrative is a choice, and that this choice has real-world effect. And some narratives will benefit us more and some will benefit us less, as you've probably understood from my previous example, right? And this is why this tool is controversial, because we could choose harmful narratives, but narratives can also be used for good. Because just as we saw with this example, framing failures as learning experiences has a real effect on our resilience and our ability to recover from failures. And research shows that in workplaces where the focus is on learning from failure, people feel greater emotional safety and they feel comfortable trying things out, they feel comfortable admitting their mistake, and this has a direct influence on the business bottom line. And so this is one of the ways narratives are used by leadership people or people in leadership position to shape the organizational culture in beneficial ways. And just to wrap things up, I'd like to share with you one story from the top of the mountains of my political mistakes. Quite a bit of time ago, I was very young, very vain, and lacked a lot of self-awareness. And I was trying to push a very big refactoring project of an important component in one of the systems that I was working on. And after I spent a while pushing it, they announced that not only will they refactor the component that I wanted to work on, they were planning to rewrite the entire module that this component was a part of. And another developer who was more senior and more experienced than me was gonna lead this initiative, but they needed both of us on this task because we were the two strong people on the team who knew the system well enough to do it. And instead of understanding that, indeed, I did not have enough experience to lead a project in that scale, and that my suggestion was accepted, and that was a vote of confidence in my ability to assess the situation in the system and to recommend better ways to do things, I shouted at everyone and left the room angrily. So to sum things up, don't be like young Hila, be smart, do ethical politics, and get stuff done. Thank you.